In Germany, just prior to World War II, members of the Nazi Party and other bullies and thugs across the country began engaging in a series of practices that we see similar examples of all across this country today. Specifically, the members of the Nazi Party and other individuals engaged in petty and creeping harassments of individuals, checkpoints, restrictions on public meetings, checking shops, other sort of interrogations, and sort of just harassments. We see examples and parallels to this that are occurring in this country, all across this country, but the one that is most disturbing to me is the pattern and practice of the banks and institutions breaking into people's homes, changing locks, in some cases throwing property into the street, and forcibly evicting Americans from homes with no legal authority or process. This, in all of the practices that we see, all the abusive practices, is perhaps the most abusive and most disturbing to me. Because when we have allowed these banks and institutions to define what their law is, we have given up an important protection that are provided to us by our court system, by law enforcement, and indeed by our Constitution. In these instances where the banks are caught breaking into homes, perhaps by law enforcement, maybe from a homeowner, unfortunately, law enforcement takes no action whatsoever. In the dozens and more instances that I am aware of, when a homeowner discovers their home has been broken into, either right then and there they call the police, or after the intruders have left, law enforcement arrives and determines that it is a civil matter and takes no action whatsoever. In those cases where legal action has been brought and cases have been brought before court, it's even more disturbing that our civil justice system finds that no real violation had occurred. And so what we are allowing to happen is the institutionalization of a breakdown of one of the cornerstones of our American experience, or constitutional right to be safe and secure in our home. Now, I dare say that there's not a single American out there that believes that when they gave their lender a mortgage interest, a lien right in the property, I don't think that any American contemplated that what they were also giving was the bank the right to break down the door of their home anytime they cared to, with no notice, and with no advance warning. And in fact, this is what is occurring out there, is in so many instances that I am aware of, the banks provide absolutely no warning that you can be victimized in this way. And in so many instances, not even in foreclosure. And that's an important point to make, is that it's bad enough that this occurs when a family is in foreclosure. Arguably, you have some notice that you're subject to some court proceeding. But in these cases where the banks have not yet even filed foreclosure, and yet they're taking it upon themselves to hire contractors who then come out and kick down the doors and change the locks, this is simply a pattern and practice that shocks the conscience, in fact should shock the conscience of Americans in courts, but unfortunately I'm finding that that's not the case. But the issue is that even though that is a gross and an abusive violation of our basic rights, this is just the beginning. The reason why we cannot allow things like this to continue to occur is that the banks and the institutions are becoming emboldened. And as we see what's occurring across this country, our fundamental rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution are in fact being not just chipped away, but are being decimated. Key right that we're seeing being chipped away is the right to assemble and right to free expression. You're seeing, obviously, in the Occupy movement, this tension between the need to control crowds and keep the public safe, and the conflict between free expression. But this is happening all across the country in less profound ways. You see many instances where law enforcement are preventing citizens from photographing or videotaping public events. And this is a violation of our right to document what's occurring in our country and with law enforcement. You're seeing photographers who are being restrained and videographers who are being restrained and materials being confiscated. You're seeing videotapes and photographs of these sort of things being removed from the web. This is a sort of totalitarianism that is creeping in all across the country. It's important that all of us be especially mindful of what is occurring, because while at the edges or here initially it may not seem so profound, it's important to understand that if we do not prevent this creeping totalitarianism from continuing to invade our country, there is no turning back. Unfortunately, we very much are at a turning point at this point in time. If we, as citizens, do not become very serious about standing up and speaking out about these things, then there really is no turning back. One of the really disturbing phenomena that we should all be taking notice of is the fact that our law enforcement all across this country have been turned from traditional law enforcement and local policing agencies to paramilitary organizations. And the distinction between law enforcement and paramilitary is hard to define, but I want you to compare what you see in law enforcement with the heavy riot gear deployed, the weapons that are provided to them, and the manner and practices in which they're engaging in. Now, clearly, there is a balance to be struck between law enforcement and the need to control the public and to keep us safe, and turning that force against people who are engaging in otherwise permissible activity. There have been a number of instances, high-profile instances, and well-documented police abuse and aggression on peaceful protesters, but unfortunately, much of that is not documented. Again, the big issue is not what we see in front of us now, although that's clearly disturbing enough, but where this is leading. As we become desensitized to the aggressive paramilitary tactics of law enforcement, and as the general public becomes more complacent, we very much become like a public with characteristics of an abused spouse or an abused child or a whipped puppy. And that is that we become less sensitized to the more dramatic occurrences that will be coming in the months and years to come. I frankly don't think it's coming in years. The point of all this, and my concern, is that we are heading into desperate and frankly potentially apocalyptic times in this country. It's critically important that Americans focus not just on what's happening in their living room, and especially not just with the NFL and Dancing with the Stars and the Kardashians, but pay careful attention to what's happening around the world. It's amazing that there are such profound and disturbing occurrences happening all around the world, and there's precious little or almost no news attention to it. The fact of the matter is that all of Europe is standing on the precipice of an absolute collapse. And when this occurs, it is going to have profound implications for the entire world. And yet you see precious little of this being discussed in the common media. But we need to pay attention to what's happening in Greece. We need to pay careful attention to what's happening in Italy and in Spain, because the very same principles that have led to the collapse of this country's financial system, particularly credit bubble, subprime boom, if you will, is occurring all across that continent, and it's going to have profound implications here in the United States of America once that contagion spreads. Related to that, and closer here to home, is the collapse of the MF Holding Group just a couple weeks ago. Now, here is a theoretically well-regulated trading company that filed for bankruptcy, and with it took 150,000 accounts of traders that were frozen. Now, I understand those might be released at some point in time, but The fact of the matter is that it was reported that more than $600 million had gone missing from these accounts, and that 150,000 accounts had been frozen. The problem is that MF is one of the very smaller bit players, and yet what we see in that example is the utter inability or unwillingness of any regulatory agency to protect the deposits and to protect the consumers who were doing business with this organization. And the response thus far by all regulatory agencies has been utterly anemic. I've made the point, and I think it's true, that if you or I walked into a bank and walked away with $100, or you walked into Walmart and walked out with $1,000, very quickly you'd be swarmed by police and would be locked up. But here we have yet another instance of a high-profile, white-collar organization stealing or misappropriating hundreds of millions of dollars. And the board, the directors, and everyone responsible for this continue to walk around and walk the streets of the public. This is a disturbing phenomenon, and the fact that there is not more attention being paid to this by members of the mainstream press and members of the general public should give us all great cause for concern. Because if this is not getting the kind of attention that it deserves, the magnitude of the problem deserves, then what's going on behind the scenes with the other bigger players? That's the question we all need to be asking at this point in time. If you're concerned enough about what you see occurring with just those things that are being made public to us, consider for just a moment what's occurring behind the scenes, in the secret boardrooms, in the halls of power, and then really understand that if you are concerned about what you do know and what you do see, your suspicions about what's going on behind the scenes are certainly well-founded. I encourage each and every one of you to become very much involved in what's happening all across the country, very much aware. You must begin communicating very effectively and persistently with your friends and family and coworkers, and begin protecting yourself. That's what's going to be required. Tough times are ahead, and we all need to be working together to look out for one another, because I don't see anybody in positions of power or leadership that are doing it, and I have absolutely no confidence that they will be there to protect us when the time comes.